So, welcome to our event Shaping Global Citizens. This is a series of events which we are conducting for study abroad aspirants to interact with global leaders, professors, industry experts to seek guidance and clarity. In addition to doing your studies, it is very important to practice discipline and follow effective routines and way of studying. So, today we have Mr. John Williams. He is the owner and co founder of Study Spot Education Services. Over the past 15 years, John has worked directly and indirectly with hundreds of adolescent students and their families. While John is a great hockey player too, so he has adapted a traditional model of athletic success and applied to the academic success, a model that focuses on an interplay between natural ability, effort, and skill development. So here I welcome John over here. John, it's a pleasure that you are here with us. So now I hand it over to you. Up to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and having the opportunity to speak to everyone this evening. Today, I want to speak to you about academic coaching. And as was mentioned, this is I've been providing academic coaching support here in Toronto, Canada, for 15 plus years, working with adolescent students, middle school, high school students, predominantly, who are struggling and wanting to provide them with some support that's going to be long-term and lasting. So today, my topic is, first of all, as much as this is a service that we've been providing for some time, we're still trying to introduce it and help students, parents understand what academic coaching is, and perhaps wanting to find out if this is the right kind of support for your son or daughter. So today we're going to answer a few questions. First off, we'll discuss who needs an academic coach? What kind of students are the ones that would benefit most from what we do? And then what is academic coaching? How does it differ from tutoring? And how do I know when signing up for an academic coach or getting an academic coach is going to be appropriate? And then I want to talk a little bit about the relationship of an academic coach and the value it brings to giving the student what they need to be successful, empowering students so that they are not only going to be successful today, but throughout their academic career. So who needs an academic coach? So I've got a list here, quite a long list it looks, of what are considered the more typical referrals that we get for our services. As we go through this list, you might start to recognize the students we're discussing here, as I'm sure that we're all familiar with some of these characteristics. So when trying to decide, if my son or daughter needs some help, what is it they need help with? Where is the breakdown taking place? So does your child leave homework until the last minute? Are they physically disorganized? Are their backpacks in disarray, their binders, loose paper everywhere? They got a messy room. Are they physically disorganized? Do they struggle to get large assignments finished on time? Is it they're not starting soon enough, or they don't know how to start, or for whatever reason, they're always doing things in the last minute to get things done, or are consistently late? Does your child, son or daughter, often feel overwhelmed by school? Do they struggle to understand text and articles, reading from a textbook? Are they able to get the information out of it that they need? Do they struggle to get their thoughts on paper? This is probably one of the most common referral concerns we get, is the student understands a lot. They're able to articulate their mind when they speak, but what comes out on paper is not a reflection of what they're thinking. And unfortunately, school, even with all the technology, students are evaluated primarily on what they're able to put on paper. And those who struggle to get their thoughts onto paper are at a big disadvantage. Does your son or daughter, they get anxious before tests and exams? That's often a sign of the lack of preparation and perhaps in need of some support. And then when they do write these tests and exams, are they surprised by the results? Do they come out thinking, oh, I did great, and actually they end up doing poorly? Or when they come out and say, no, I don't think I did very well, but end up doing quite well? Either way, that disconnect between what they thought they would do and what they actually did is very much a good sign that there's something amiss and that there's probably a lack of skills in there that need to be addressed. And overall, and you certainly see this all the time, is that if your child, or you see it, or your son or daughter's been told that they should be doing far better than what their marks are reflection of. If there is a gap between what your son or daughter is capable of and what they're actually generating, that's often a sign of a student who would benefit from academic coaching. You'll notice in this list here, I haven't written down, not very good at math or struggles with science, because those really, when you get to middle school and high school, aren't really where the breakdowns for most students take place. This list here would be reflective of when students struggle, usually what the issues are. So what is academic coaching? Well, academic coaching is one-on-one academic support. A coach and a student working together. The philosophy of Study Spot has always been that when students get to high school and they underachieve, the issues are not subject related. They're not content related. They're usually due to them being ineffective students. They are not able to, they don't know how to learn effectively. And so we provide them with a coach or a mentor, if you will, to work one-on-one with them to show them how to be more effective students. And through this mentorship relationship, we can hopefully open that student's mind to doing things differently. We have an advantage as a coach is that we're not mom and dad, we're not a teacher. In the eyes of an adolescent, a coach might have some, what we call street credibility. They may be more open to listen to that person and to take advice from them. And there's nothing magical when we're talking about academic coaching, nothing magical to what we are working on. These are really just introducing and practicing what would be considered the best practices of a good student. These skills will certainly be helpful to the student in the short term, but what we're really doing is developing these skills for those students who intend to pursue post-secondary education, whether it be college or university, where these skills are going to be obviously of paramount importance. So what are these skills? So we're not focused on content, we're focused on the development of skills. And these skills fall into two categories. The first category is executive skills. So executive skills relates to executive functioning. The executive skills are organization, physical organization, mental organization, time management, planning. It's how the student functions day to day. Do they have a routine? Do they have a regular workspace? Do they know how to plan for a project? Do they know how to plan a week ahead? Do they know how to create a to-do list? Do they know how to be productive? All of these skills here, they're not just obviously academic skills, these are life skills, and thus they're referred to as these executive skills. And these develop throughout a young person's life into adulthood. But it's during these adolescent years that these skills become the most important. And for some students, they're a little delayed in developing these skills. It's not that they won't develop them, it's just that if they develop them earlier, it certainly would be better. But we're able to help them, provide them with this foundation, the structure, and the habits, the strategies, all of which can help them become more organized. And then, of course, once they're organized and they're doing the schoolwork, they need to develop academic skills. And so here we're looking at reading comprehension, not knowing how to read, but knowing how to identify what's important and what's not important when they read. Differentiating between main ideas and supporting details. Can they go into a textbook and clearly and easily find the main information and then take that main information and put it onto paper in the form of notes and note-taking? And so note-taking is a skill which we need to begin to introduce, as there's various ways in which to record information and keep track of information that's going to help students both understand information, what they're learning, and be able to remember what they're learning. And then, as I referred to before, writing skills, getting their thoughts onto paper, whether that be in the form of essays or projects or even just notes. Being able to communicate what's going on in their mind clearly and concisely so someone else can understand it is of growing importance as they go through school, more so in high school than in elementary, but certainly a great deal more when it comes to university. And as I mentioned, it's an area that many of our students struggle with because there's such a disproportionate amount of weight placed upon what a student produces on paper. And if that's a weakness for a student, it's going to disproportionately affect their ability to score well. And then, of course, test and exam preparation. And as you go through school, tests and exams become greater and greater importance. Many students that we work with, and I may be describing many of your sons or daughters, are very bright, and they've done very well in elementary school. And mostly because they're bright, not because of anything that they're doing specifically. And they've gotten by on their natural abilities. Well, over time, they're less and less capable of doing that. And school tests and exams become bigger, they become more difficult, and their ability just to remember stuff or just to listen and kind of figure things out is not going to be good enough for them to be able to score well on a test and exam. They're going to have to learn how to study. And many students don't know how to study. They study very passively. They read and reread information as opposed to actively learning, where they test and retest themselves. They manipulate information. They're involved in the whole process of learning. And so this transition from taking students from being passive learners into being active learners is a real big component of the academic coaching focus for our students. And you'll notice these skills that are listed here, very few of them are actually built into the curriculum. You might get a little bit of this or a little bit of organization in middle school. You might get a little bit of writing in literature course, perhaps in early high school, but very little time is spent on this. In school, they're taught stuff. And what we know that students should be developing during these years is how to learn stuff. And that's really what the focus is for academic coaching. So how does this differ, academic coaching compared to tutoring? Well, much of it I've already mentioned, but specifically, academic coaching is broader based, long-term kind of support. We can apply academic coaching to all subject areas. Students that we work with, they might not be doing very well in science, but they can also see that in other subjects that they're also starting to trend downward, that the weakness, if you're a weakness in an organization, it's likely going to affect all your subjects. And so our support, academic coaching support, is better applied to students who need help across subject areas. The great thing about our coaching is that it's done with the student in school, applying these skills to their current schoolwork. Trying to teach students outside of the school, outside of their own classroom, as if it's another course, can be demotivating for an adolescent student, and not see the application, which is often the great disconnect for students, what they do with what they get. Whereas applying these skills directly to their current schoolwork, they can see the skills in action. Plus, because we're working on skills, it's much like that saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And it's a very similar, we're not just giving them the answers, we're not just telling them how to answer a single question, we're showing them how to learn. And because they can now take that skill and apply it today, tomorrow, and for the rest of their academic life, what we're giving students is a sense of control, right? It's not just luck. If I walk into a class and I happen to have a good teacher, I'll do well. Or if it's a subject that I happen to like, I'll do well. Or we'll eliminate that. Let's show you how to learn so you can be successful no matter what it is that you're learning in any environment. So again, the academic coaching philosophy is long-term and broad-based and more about giving the students control. Tutoring, and there is a role for tutoring, but it's short-term. It's really only only effective if it's for very specific amount of information over a very short period of time. For example, if I'm in my later grades of high school and I'm doing well except in chemistry and I don't understand this unit very well, get a tutor, have them reteach that to you so you can then do well. Or if I have a specific test coming up that I want to do well on, a tutor might make sense there. However, again, for short-term periods of time where specific content is needed. Now, but to have a tutor ongoing all the time, it starts to undermine the effectiveness of that. And the reason being is you can create dependency. Right? If I start to believe as a student, if I start to believe that I only do well on science tests when I work with this tutor here, because they can teach it to me better than my teacher, well, that might be true for this particular test, but that's not going to be very helpful going forward. I'd want to know, why is it that I'm unable to learn this material? Why is it that I struggle to learn independently? Whereas tutoring really just fills gaps. And it can create that dependency because, and we will all admit, that we would all learn better in a one-on-one environment. Of course we would. And so often that's why tutoring can be very effective in a short period of time, because it's a one-on-one attention that they're getting. Except that going forward throughout their academic career, that's not how learning takes place. A student needs to be able to learn in a larger forum, say at university or college or classroom, or be able to learn independently without other people's support. And that's the kind of skills that in the long run are going to benefit students. And as I said, I've worked with many students, families where they have 2, 3, 4, 5 tutors on the go, one for every subject. And that would be an indication that, hold on, it's not possible that I'm not doing very well in all these subjects, that there isn't some sort of commonality between them. And again, it's usually skill-based as opposed to all these different specifics that way. So there is a big distinction to be made between academic coaching and tutoring. Similarities in that we are working with current schoolwork and that we want to help the student improve both today, but academic coaching is built for the long term. Tutoring is built for the short term. So you're listening now and you're thinking, well, might it be appropriate for my son or daughter? Well, you have to ask these types of questions. If your son or daughter wants to improve their overall performances across subject areas in school, looking into an academic coach probably makes the most sense. If your son or daughter is disorganized and they have difficulty managing school and this is what's holding them back, an academic coach is likely what the best area to investigate. If you know that your son or daughter has been doing fine in school, but they're now finding school a little more tougher, their marks are dropping and they don't know why, and they're more than capable, that's usually the indication that they need to develop their skills, that the skills are not developing as time is going on and would benefit from a coach. Another area is my son or daughter stressed out? Are they struggling with anxiety, school-related anxiety? We see this often. And there's 2 areas that we really see this in. Those students who are disorganized or have difficulty planning, and they're always rushing around last minute, they're always putting out fires, they tend to be stressed and anxious about school. And of course, developing their organization and planning skills will be how to address that. But then we've also got this group of students over here who do exceptionally well in school. Their marks are fantastic, except it comes at a great price. They work way too hard to achieve those results. And so they're up all night, they're studying all the time, and they shouldn't have to be putting that much effort in to achieve those marks. And so if you have a grade 9 student who's working that hard to achieve those marks, well, that's not sustainable. And we as parents recognize when our son or daughter are engaged in behavior that are not sustainable. Yes, you're doing fine now, but what are you going to do next year when it's harder? Or the next year after that? Or what about when I go to university? You have to be more effective as a learner, efficient as a learner. We shouldn't be spending 3 hours working hard to accomplish something that should have taken half an hour. And these kinds of breakdowns that we see that often cause students stress and anxiety are areas and types of situations where an academic coach can be helpful. And those students, and if a student has been identified with an underlying learning challenge, which really means that they have a very specific diagnosed weakness that is undermining their ability to do well in school, and there's many different types, that is a student to which they require the development of skills and strategies to overcome that weakness. And of course, we are a good fit for that as well. So how about this coaching relationship? What makes it so special? Well, as was mentioned in my introduction, I'm in Canada, so I'm a hockey player and have been for many years, and played competitive hockey through university, and then coached adolescents for quite a number of years at a high level as well, which is where this whole coaching model really began to come from, was what made the coach-athlete relationship special, and where do we get this resistance from the student-teacher relationship and the struggles there. And so there's a number of things about that. First of all, with the coaching relationship, one of the benefits is that we're not mom and dad and we're not the teacher. And my coaches are typically, someone who is a good communicator, who can take on a different type of relationship with a student, like a mentor. And where a student is not going to feel that initial need to be defensive or put up the walls or, not want to listen. They're more likely to be open with this person, especially if they have a good rapport. So that relationship is very important. And because it's one-on-one, a student feels like that they're being heard and it is their goals that they're trying to be achieved, not someone else's. And so it's this collaborative relationship that a coach and a student has, where the coach doesn't go in and say, this is what you need to do, this is what you should aspire to be, and this is how you do it. It is more, what is it you want to accomplish? And let's figure out a way to do that together. And for a student, that is a far more welcoming type of relationship that they're likely to engage in. And so every student is different. As mentioned, I've worked with hundreds. I mean, through the years, we're into the thousands of students that StudySpot has worked with. And of course, all the breakdowns that I've been speaking to you about are pretty common, but each student is different. And every experience I've ever worked with a student is all completely different than the ones I've worked with before, because we're all so unique. And so it's that relationship, that unique relationship between a coach and a student who can work together collaboratively to figure out what's going to work best for this student. What works best for one might not work best for another. And it's important for us to have that kind of one-on-one relationship to, empower that student to be able to become the independent learner that they need to be. And again, when you go into working with a student, you say, what is it you want from this? It's a very powerful question to ask a student, because it's about who they are and what they want. And in most cases, students want to achieve what they're capable of achieving. And academic coaching can be a great step towards helping them achieve that. Thank you. I would, again, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, to introduce the concept of academic coaching. I know we may have some questions more specific about it, which I'd be happy to answer. And hopefully that many of you have recognized that or made you think about the idea of another option when it comes to providing your son or daughter the support that they need.
John, this is Rahul. I was just wondering if you could also explain what a typical session would look like. I mean, if there is a difference between the first session and follow-up sessions, that kind of thing as well. Maybe if you could talk on that.
Yeah, hopefully this screen is a better one to use. You see me answering. Typical session. Yeah, again, all the relationships with coaches and students are unique. However, the structure of sessions are all very similar. Typically at the beginning of a session, the coach and student are going to talk about what's happened over the past week. It's something that students, often adolescent students, don't do. They don't reflect. They don't think about what did I do last week and what can I do differently, or what can I do better? And so that's an opportunity in the coach-student relationship to discuss and to reflect on the week that's passed. How did that test go that we studied for? Hey, did you get your homework done this week? Hey, did you keep to the schedule that we created? Why? Okay, if not, then what can we do differently this week? And so after this initial reflection, then we talk about planning. What do we have going forward? What subjects do we have coming up? Let's go through each subject. What is it that we need to get done? Do you understand what's being asked of you? How long do you think that's going to take? And then put together a weekly plan that's going to allow a student to have and take into consideration their extracurricular activities and their own personal schedules, so they know what can be done. And then based on what they have on the go, academically, they're going to work on a skill. Now, whether that be, studying for an upcoming test, planning their ideas for an essay they have to write, putting together the stages and a plan for completing a project, or maybe just reading and taking a set of notes from their science textbook. We're going to help them develop these larger base skills and help them apply it to things they have to do in the short term. So the student sees the connection between what I do and the things I get. And then usually to wrap up a session, we ask, what is it that, what can we do differently? So what did we learn today? Why is that important? And how can we apply it going forward? So that kind of closes the loop on a session. So that's the structure of a typical session. Where that session goes each week might go in different directions, but over time, a student will get pretty good a sense of what it is they do.
I mean, would you also say that, I mean, in terms of the kind of students that get the most benefit out of this, would they be more the, typical creative types who are not very well organized and where the coach can help more than the other scenario?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's certainly a population of students, free thinkers, creative students, and so on, who who struggle with structure. And those students are ideal for the students we work with. As I said, the academic world is not really like the real world necessarily. Being able to, get by with being creative and so on has a lot of opportunities in the world. But in school, it's pretty rigid, and that sometimes doesn't match up. So learning how to be organized, learning how to create structure, create a routine is of great importance academically. And so there's certainly a great deal number of students who can show their strengths in many different ways. And it takes many different make this world go around. Academically, however, it's a pretty tight little circle. So some students where that doesn't come naturally, by no fault of their own, will benefit from learning how to control and how to take on that that kind of behavior that may not come naturally.
I see a question on the chat as well coming up that talks about, how can it be beneficial or is it beneficial for college kids who are going on, to further degrees, and what do you have to say to that? I know several, leading universities have this program, but if you can talk on that for a minute.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and it's a growing part of my own practice here is university students and college students, because they're not learning these skills in high school. They get to university, and university is a whole different experience. But let a student be successful in high school is no longer applicable in university. And that is a real shock to students making that transition from high school to college and universities. And so, of course, we work with students in college, university. The primary difference is that you're right. In many universities, they provide these kind of resources are available to them. And I often encouraging university students to pursue those as well. In high schools, there's very little of that kind of resource available, which is the gap that we fill. But having said that, even at the university level, sometimes students are more comfortable with this kind of one-on-one coaching relationship that allows them to have, once again, a much more personalized experience than perhaps they have going into the learning strategies office or student support services at a university. So you're absolutely right. The skill sets are the same. The development is required, especially if they haven't developed these skills over their high school career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if anyone else on the panel wanted to jump in. There was only
we know that with many of the students we work with, just as a talk about what that initial process looks like. There's a questionnaires that are filled out so the parent can give us a good sense of their son or daughter, what their needs are. But it's important, as I said, it's important for the coach and student to establish that rapport. And so usually early on in the process, there's a questionnaire, executive skills questionnaire, an academic skills questionnaire that really starts for the student and the coach to get to know each other so that they can really identify where the breakdowns are taking place for a student. Learning is very simple, right? If you think of learning in the whole, information comes to us through reading, through lecture, through experiments, and then later they ask for the information back through exams, through presentations, through essays. That's it. Information in, information out. And students who struggle often think of, I don't do very well on tests, and they think of it as an output problem, or I can't get essays, my essays aren't very good. And they think of that as an output problem. And almost always it's an input problem. the way I'm taking my notes when I take in, the way I'm reading and identifying information, the length of time I'm studying before tests, or how I'm organizing my time and how I'm making a plan. All that is about how the information comes in, and it has a big impact on the way out. So these initial questionnaires with students, it gets the conversation for the student thinking about not just editing my essay, but how am I planning my thoughts before I even start to write? And so it gets them thinking about the kind of skills that we're going to be teaching as academic coach. So I often tell families that, after 2 or 3 sessions, a student should have a pretty good idea as to what it is that we're doing and how it differs from typical tutoring and why it's going to be valuable for them. And then, of course, later on in the process, down the road, they can go back to those questionnaires and reevaluate and see if they're improving in some of these matrices that were originally established.
So, John, one more thing, like we always say that academic coach helps students not just with their studies, but how to study effectively, right? So it's primarily having better ways of studying, managing your lifestyle, managing your things. So can you just give a couple of examples or some case studies which you can explain for the benefit of our students? Because while you have explained what is academic coach, how it helps, but a case study or an example would actually help all of us to understand better.
Yeah, exactly. I had a student who I just was recently working with, and again, it was kind of like I was saying, that he just doesn't think he does well in tests. He freezes up. Oh, I went in the test and I got frozen and I didn't know what to do. And that's the problem I have. I have test anxiety. I've got, and so we have this phenomenon where many students feel like they know the information. They go into a test or exam, they sit down, they forget it all. An hour later, they stand back up, they walk out of the room, and they remember it all again. And they think, oh, I've got this psychological problem that when it comes to tests and exams, I just can't write them. And the reality is that they don't know how to study. They were never prepared. Too often, when students study passively, they familiarize themselves with information. So they look at it passively. They might have a topic to which they understand it. They can have a conversation about it. It makes sense to them, but that's not good enough for a test. And at some point, you have to test yourself. Practice writing the answers down that you're going to have to write come test time, so that you know whether you know something or not. And there's a big difference between passively knowing and understanding information and also being able to write answers out on a test. And that's the big difference between passive and active learning. And testing and retesting ourselves, creating summary notes, teaching others. There's many different ways for us to absorb and take in information that's going to prepare us to write a test, not just familiarize ourselves with the information, which is the primary breakdown for most students. So that'd be an example of where a student might see a disconnect between what they do and the results they get. I mean, on the I'll just continue on the organization front. And so students also sometimes have this perception that I work better under pressure. We hear that often all the time. No, I can't start that. It's not due until Monday. I have the whole weekend, and I just can't get started on it. I'll wait till Sunday night when I really have to get done. And they have this perception that they do better work when under pressure, and that's just not the case at all. They would have done much better had they started a week earlier. It just feels like they have to get it done, and so that sense of urgency is what drives their organization system, and it gives them the sense that they're accomplishing things when in reality they're not. They're not doing their best work, and so they need to learn that learning in smaller chunks over time is far, far more effective than trying to learn everything all at once. And it may seem obvious when we talk about it like this, but in the moment, it's a place where most students would benefit from is having a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as you rightly said, it's actually a very thin line between learning and how to express yourself in the test. So many times we know that we have learned it, we know it, but when we write the exam, And that actually happens with a lot of people, that when we write the exams, we tend to forget a lot of stuff. So I think this is very important to know.
Yeah, well, the easiest thing to that, I tell like students will say, "Oh, I've studied." I said, "Well, how are you going to do on the test?" They'd say, "Well, I don't know." Well, I said, how can you not know? You should be testing yourself. It should never be a surprise what questions are going to be on a test. If I'm writing a science test or economics or geography or history, any subject like this, the questions that are going to be on the test should be pretty obvious. Or certainly by the time you get to high school, they should be pretty obvious, the kind of questions that are going to be asked. Then ask yourself ahead of time. Test yourself. See if you know it. Practice writing down your answers. You should have a pretty good sense of how you're going to do in a test before you go in. On math and science questions, obviously it's difficult to replicate the kind of questions, but you can do enough of those questions over and over and over again to give you a sense of whether I know how to do a question or I don't know how to do a question. So there are active ways in which to prepare yourself to write a test. So there shouldn't be surprises. And that in of itself is a skill. Because I told you this today doesn't mean tomorrow you're going to be an expert. It takes practice to anticipate questions, to test yourself, to figure out that whole process. But that is the line, the path that you want to be on with regards to improving as a student, as opposed to just going into every test and I hope I do well. That shouldn't be your approach to tests.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the earlier you start this, the better it is, because that helps in the long run. And be it any test, not just a school test, but any test, competitive exams, whatever. I think the attitude helps the way you actually develop yourself.
Well, exactly. And the first exam you ever write, whether that be in grade 9 or in grade 7, or depending on what school or however it is, that first exam you ever write is not going to be your best. Right? It's just not. You will get better and better at it as time goes on, especially if you are approaching with the idea that I can get better at this. And if I practice and if I pay attention and I reflect on what I've done, I can get better at it. And so the more exams you write, the better you become at writing exams. And so you have to think of it that way, as opposed to the thinking process where an exam is going to tell me how smart I am. And that's not what tests are for. It's not what exams are for. They're not there to tell you how smart you are. What exams and tests are there to know is how good a student you are. Were you able to take the time to learn this information? And can you articulate in an articulate manner, communicate it back to us and show us that you've learned it? That's what a test does. And that's a very different way of thinking than thinking of a test or exam as judging how smart you are. And that's a fundamental thing that a student needs to realize if they're going to be successful academically.
A question on the progress. How do you track the progress? I mean, when the coach starts working on day 1 to, let's say, 3 months down the road, any big goals or, weekly, or how do you go about that?
Certainly. So goal setting is a very interesting topic for this kind of work, because there are things that you have control over, and then there's things that you don't have control over. For example, if I'm a teacher of a class and I'm going to create a test for my class, I could create a test to which every student fails. I could do that, just make it really hard. It's within my power. I could also create a test which every student does really well on. Again, I create a really easy one. That's the power I have as a teacher. So if that's the case, it's difficult to hold a student accountable exactly for the mark that they get on any given test entirely, because some of it's outside their control. So how do we create a goal that is mark-based, because that's ultimately what we need to get, is good, how to get better marks and so on, but not hold them, but keep them within things that they can actually control. So the idea is that when you create a goal, a long-term goal, I want to be on a roll. I'd like an 85% average by the end of the school year. I want to get a 90 in science. I want to pass all my courses, whatever the goal might be. We want to establish that. But then we need to ask ourselves, what are the habits and strategies that I'm going to need to utilize to achieve that mark? So the goals might be getting my homework done every night, planning and studying ahead for my tests. I need to have a good routine at home so that I can stay on top of work. I need to have better notes, and so that I can do better on tests and exams. So we start to identify the habits and behaviors in which a student has total control over. They have total control whether their notes are good or not. They've got total control whether or not they do their homework each night. Those are the things that we really want to be able to focus on, not focused on whether I got an 80% on every one of my quizzes. That's going to be very difficult for a student to really feel a sense of control over. We want to set goals to which they have controls over that they have control over. And then over time, we can start to then evaluate, are we achieving to what we think we're capable of achieving? So the goal setting is very interesting, where we have an overriding goal, a mark that we want to achieve, getting into a school, whatever that is, a specific program. But then we have to identify what are the habits and behaviors that are required for me to be successful, and then focus on those on a daily basis. And that is going to be what the coach and student want to focus on, is what are these skills we need to develop, so that if we do those things, those marks will take care of themselves. So, I mean, going back to how evaluating, coaching is something you evaluate on an ongoing basis. For parents, we should start to see changes in those first couple months. They're doing their homework more consistently. They're feeling more confident in school. I see them doing this extra work. They enjoy the sessions. They find them very helpful. Those are all good signs that we're heading in the right direction in the short term. In the long term, you'd want to see some performance marks that reflect what they're capable of.
All right. Okay. Makes the parent's job a little easier when the kid is working with the coach.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the biggest the biggest comments we get from parents is they say, my relationship with my son or daughter is better. And the reason being is because there's somebody else now having these conversations with their son or daughter, they don't have to. And so they're not all, how it is with their kids, sometimes is that all conversations end up in the same place. They all end up talking about school. Did you get your homework done? Are you doing it? What are you done? What do you have coming up? Constantly knocking heads. And that doesn't do your relationship, very, very positively. So and so having somebody else who's asking those questions and working on those things allows a parent to take a step backwards from it and just engage your son or daughter without having those contentious topics to have to worry about. It happens often. My relationship with my son is better. He's happier. My daughter and I aren't as fighting about school as much anymore. I'm really happy that she's working with so-and-so because I know that they're doing some good work together. That kind of comment is quite common. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I think we're out of time almost. So.
Thank you, John. I think there is one more question. What to do if my exam score is not increasing? Maybe we can take one last question, as we have just done with the time.
Yeah. So your marks aren't getting better and you don't know why. You're working hard and so on. So that's a great thing too. The fact that you're asking that question is the right one. And as long as you can say, okay, you start to evaluate, what is it that I'm doing? And is there ways that I can do this better? What have I learned from these last exams? Is the way in which I'm studying impactful? And your marks aren't just going to go up just because. If you keep doing the same thing every time, your marks are going to reflect that they're probably going to stay the same. If they need to get better, then you probably need to be doing more effective things. And so asking the kinds of questions that I was just talking about, testing yourself ahead of time, using different active study strategies, then those are the ways in which you are going to see improvement, is if you are constantly evaluating what am I doing and trying to continue to replicate best practices going forward. And if those are the kind of questions you have, then maybe those are the questions for a coach to help with, is to help you go through your studying process to see where the breakdown is. Is the breakdown when I take notes? Is it what's happening in class? Is it what I'm doing at home? Is it what I'm doing a week before the test? Is it what I'm doing the night before a test? At some point along the way, there's a breakdown, and that would be something you would want to search through.
All right. Thank you, John. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. And really, again, thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you, and look forward to answering any questions you may have down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it was a very insightful session. It was great to know all of these details. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.